Well, thank you very much, Carbon Units, and David, I love your schematic. That's priceless, and he's absolutely right about that. The first thing I want to point out to you, here are some of those academic think tanks that David was talking about, the people who think that they can plan economic policy on a blackboard and nothing happens to it in the sausage factory. And my topic today is a carbon tax a conservative idea whose time has come? Just to state this question should be enough to answer it. It's a ridiculous notion, and yet this, I think, is something to really keep an eye on. My colleague Myron and Ebel often say to each other, you know, we could really win this battle if we weren't fragged so often by people who are supposedly on our side, fellow conservatives. So it's a long list of very prestigious economists who are advocating carbon taxes allegedly as conservatives, as the smart thing for the Republican Party and the next Republican presidential candidate to get behind. They did this in 2012. Every election year they come out of the woodwork saying that this is an idea whose time has come. Now, what their argument is that you can't beat something with nothing. We have to have a positive alternative to cap and trade and EPA, greenhouse gas regulation and something. And if conservatives don't get serious about the challenge of climate change, we'll become politically irrelevant. We complain about EPA regulations, we complain about income taxes, but we don't have a plan to do anything about it. The carbon tax gives us a plan. And there's what's not to like. It taxes bads instead of goods, you know, and it will give us this wonderful leverage in politics to get EPA out of the climate regulation business, reduce capital gains taxes and all kinds of other good stuff. And this also is not pie in the sky, folks, because it's been tried in British Columbia. We need to follow the British Columbia model. Seriously, this is what they argue. All right. Let's look at all this idiocy. Basically, the problem here is that they confuse not supporting a defeatist compromising inside the Beltway deal with not having a plan. We do have a plan. Our plan is to make the moral, economic, and scientific case for affordable, market-driven energy, and then to throw the bums out in 2014 and 2016. That's our plan. It's a victory plan. Their whole scheme, their whole deal-making assumes that conservative victory is impossible. What would Ronald Reagan say about that? All right, now, they say you can't beat something with nothing. This is demonstrably false. This is what they said when Congress was debating cap and trade, the Waxman-Markey bill. It's what they said when the Senate, people in the We beat them by pointing out that cap and trade is cap and tax, right? It's a stealth energy tax, and we beat them by mobilizing, and here the Heartland Institute deserves major kudos, mobilizing a climate skeptic movement. And so what they're ignoring is that we have a winning message, which is climate realism combined with affordable energy, the defense of affordable energy as essential to human health and welfare. Okay. They also, they're just simply behind the times. You've already seen this graph, but they think that climate change doomsday scenarios are really worth taking seriously, and that the public takes them seriously. And in fact, opinion poll after opinion poll shows that the public doesn't worry all that much about global warming. It's way down on the list of public priorities because the science isn't there. The computer models are way over projecting the actual amount of warming. And even if you look at the IPCC, which remains a stronghold, a fortress of climate alarm, look what they say in their latest report, that Al Gore's 3 big doomsday scenarios, ocean circulation shut down, you know, ice sheet disintegration, let's see, what is the other big one there? Oh yeah, and catastrophic release of methane emissions causing a runaway greenhouse effect. That all of that stuff is wildly implausible. about, you've heard about this already, is jobs and economic opportunity. And it just so happens, look at the blue states on the map, that the states which are among the have the highest rates of GDP growth are also the states where the most amount of fossil energy production is taking place. In other words, energy production today, this energy renaissance we're experiencing, it's one of the bright spots of the economy. But, you know, you can't put pedal to the metal and slam on the brakes at the same time. These same conservatives who support a carbon tax say they also want fracking. They also want, you know, they also want more oil production, the Keystone Pipeline, maybe even more coal mining. And yet they're coming out in favor of a tax, the premise of which is that fossil fuels are wrecking the planet and should be suppressed. So they're totally conflicted. And as the Republican Party's great founder said, quoting the Bible, a house divided against itself cannot stand. If Republican leaders or conservative leaders embrace their message, they will divide the movement and demoralize the base. So politically, this is about as dumb as it gets. Carbon taxes are not a serious policy that would give us some kind of credibility. As David pointed out, even if the U.S. economy were to totally shut down tomorrow, no emissions, zero emissions, cold turkey, Chip Knappenberger has shown us that this would avert less than 0.2 of 1 degree Celsius by the year 2100, which for all practical purposes is negligible, and any kind of politically feasible carbon tax would do much less in terms of climate impacts. But as David points out, the economic impact would be trillions of dollars. Okay, now the other thing they say is that we can negotiate a grand bargain with the green movement to make sure that this tax is revenue neutral. That means every dollar in carbon taxes raises would displace a dollar in income taxes or capital gains taxes or FICA taxes. And it would also, we would be able to trade away all of EPA's greenhouse gas regulations, all those state renewable energy mandates, all right. Someone yesterday quoted the Jefferson Airplane. Well, I'm going to do the same thing. What are these people smoking? You know, I mean, this is so ludicrous. As David pointed out, and I'm quoting David here from a debate that I saw him have, it is delusional to believe that $200 billion in new tax revenues could walk across town without being molested. Okay? Another point just to consider is that carbon taxes are regressive, and this means real impacts on the lives of real people. Look up there at that chart. That shows that people who earn $10,000 a year or less, households, have to make real sacrifices. They have to go without food, they have to go without health care, sometimes they can't pay the rent and so on, because energy prices are already too high, because they have to pay so much of their income already on gas and utilities. A carbon tax would just make that worse. So what does that mean? That any carbon tax would then have, a big chunk of that would have to be devoted not to reducing other taxes, but to creating a new welfare scheme with more welfare dependents, all right, to be manipulated by Uncle Sam. This is a conservative policy. I'll skip that one. Now, this also is such a canard. You hear this all the time, but I just want to shoot it down. They say that carbon taxes tax bads rather than goods. A good in their jargon meaning labor and capital. But in fact, a carbon tax is not a consumption tax. It's not a tax on consumption, although consumers pay it in the form of higher prices for goods and services. It's an activity tax because the carbon that's being taxed is the carbon that's inseparable from energy use, and energy is a factor of production. If you tax carbon, you are taxing production, and therefore you are also taxing labor, because if capital goods cost more, you can't afford to hire as many laborers or pay them as high wages. So that's just bogus. I'll skip this one. The other thing they like to say is, oh, well, this tax doesn't pick winners and losers. Oh, no, we wouldn't want to do that. No, this just creates a level playing field and then lets the free market sort out the consequences. This is ridiculous. Look at the bottom, the second to the last bullet point there. This is what President Obama and former Energy Secretary Chu said about the function of carbon pricing schemes. And a carbon tax, like cap and trade, is just a carbon pricing scheme, right? The purpose is to, quote, finally make renewable energy the profitable kind of energy in America. It's to drive investment decisions toward clean energy. The whole function of a carbon tax is to handicap all fossil fuels. Okay, it's not retail intervention like giving a specific subsidy to Solyndra. It's wholesale intervention. The whole thing is designed to rig the entire marketplace against fossil fuels. So it's all about picking winners and losers. As far as rolling back EPA, Henry Waxman, when he introduced his carbon tax bill, said, quote, it would be the best legislative option, the second bullet point, but I wouldn't want it to replace the other actions that, say, the EPA could take, okay? And if you look at their bills, it doesn't roll back EPA's regulations one iota. It doesn't preempt any state regulation of greenhouse gases. Does anyone really think that Massachusetts versus EPA, the Supreme Court case that launched EPA on its merry way, the proliferation of state renewable energy mandates, fuel economy standards, federal energy efficiency mandates, state electricity demand reduction programs, on, that these were all just a strategy of the Greens to put us over a barrel so that we could, so that the Greens could finally trade it all away for a carbon tax? I mean, this is the most silly. All right, now let's finally get to the British Columbia model. And all right, this is a pie chart showing where British Columbia gets its electricity, all right? They get 82% of their electricity from hydropower, which would not be subject to the carbon tax. They get another 10% or so from biomass, which is not subject to the carbon tax. Basically, what is it there? 5.8%, which is natural gas, the lowest carbon of all fossil fuels. That's the only part of their energy, their electricity supply system that would be burdened by the carbon tax. And guess what? Yeah, it started out revenue neutral, and it started out small, $20 a ton, but in 5 years later, the Pembina Institute, which was the spearhead, the vanguard for this movement in British Columbia, saying, oh no, let's raise the tax to $200 a ton, which would have put a $1,000 burden on households, and also let's get rid of revenue neutrality. This, by comparison, shows how inappropriate the British Columbia model is. I got this slide from Dr. Kreutzer here. That shows that 21 states in the United States get most of their electricity from coal. Another half the states, coal is the leading source of electricity, unlike British Columbia, which has no coal electricity, okay? And so here's finally, I think, the political big picture, which is that the war for hearts and minds in this country is being fought out by two movements, parties, factions, call them what you will. One is pro-tax and anti-energy, let's call them the progressives, and one is anti-tax and pro-energy. Let's call those the conservatives, the party of limited government, whatever you want to call them. But we are truly the dumb party if we squander our tax and energy advantage and mangle the product differentiation that gives most people a reason to support conservative politicians. So, you know, Me Too republicanism has always been kind of a dysfunctional strategy. Me Too conservatism would be completely idiotic. And so we don't want to be Tweedledum to their Tweedledee. Thank you very much.